Thank you. So good morning, everyone. It is nice to see all of you here as you start day 2 of the public forum on this topic. Thank you for your interest in this topic. Today we will be discussing a very interesting ASEAN-focused topic, beyond borders, and the bold paths we are taking towards MSME digitalization. I am very proud to introduce our discussants and the permanent representative to our WTO mission in the Philippines who will be giving our opening remarks today. But first, allow me to please introduce the topic that we will be talking about. So we often talk about the promise of the digital economy, reshaping trade, connecting markets, and transforming the way businesses engage with customers. Yet much of that potential remains untapped, especially for the smallest players, namely the micro, small, and medium enterprises, or MSMEs, as they form the backbone of our economies. And there, ladies and gentlemen, is the paradox. They make up 95% of businesses worldwide and generate 60% of jobs, yet they struggle to compete and grow beyond their domestic markets. Many are held back by financing gaps, systemic barriers, and a lack of essential tools. And this disconnect is not just a challenge, it is a call to action. Specifically in ASEAN, there is a real buzz on MSMEs. There are around 680 million people in Southeast Asia, 480 million of which are digital customers already. It is a region classified by its rapid mobile wallet adoption and growing regional connectivity. Taken together, ASEAN then becomes a significant economic bloc with real momentum. It opens a bold path for MSMEs to leapfrog traditional barriers. So the question we will ask ourselves today is, can digitalization help MSMEs go from small domestic players to successful regional ones? We will be exploring catalysts in policy, technology, and partnerships, and hopefully turn these ideas into real opportunities for ASEAN MSMEs. So again, I'd like to introduce myself. I am Rowie Zamora, the Chief Strategy Officer of GCash, which is the largest fintech super app in the Philippines. I will be introducing our panelists also later, but please allow me the honor to call up on stage our ambassador and permanent representative of the Philippines to the WTO, Mr. Ambassador Manuel Tihanki. Or you can use this.
A very good morning. It is indeed my pleasure to welcome you all to this session hosted by the Philippines Beyond Borders, ASEAN's bold paths to MSME digitalization. Of course, let me first thank our partner, Mint GCash, the Philippines' leading digital provider, one of the well-known unicorns of Asia, for co-organizing this event. I also warmly welcome our speakers, of course, Ms. Rowena Zamora of GCash, Felix Sharif of Dana, Indonesia, and Ms. Carmela Holtreff of the BIS Information Hub. Your participation this morning reflects the strong public and private sector commitment to practical innovation in our region. This year's theme of the public forum, which welcomes indeed WTO's interaction with the civil society and private sector, is Enhance, Create, and Preserve. This invites us to strengthen cooperation, build practical solutions, and promote inclusive growth. These principles guide our work in MSME digitalization. In July, the Philippines joined the first ever global SME ministerial meeting in South Africa, focused on connecting MSMEs globally, advancing digital inclusion, and supporting sustainability. In ASEAN, MSMEs form the backbone of our economies. Challenges persist though. The Boston Consulting Group's recent Heart of Hustle report, which surveyed Filipino MSMEs, found that most are eager to adopt digital tools to support their sales, payments, and logistics, yet access to finance remains the biggest constraint. Our region is responding. ASEAN is forming the Digital Economy Framework Agreement, or DEFA, currently under negotiation, and the Philippines is committed to concluding DEFA during our ASEAN chairmanship starting in January 2026. The key initiatives such as cross-border QR code payments, testing of unique business identifiers are already paving the way for a more inclusive and efficient regional digital economy. So MSME digitalization will be a core focus of our ASEAN chairmanship. The WTO can indeed play a meaningful role, and there are 4 areas where the WTO can add value. Payments, interoperability, and remittances. There will soon be a thematic session in October, and the Philippines has worked closely with like-minded members. Second, consumer protection and trust. MSMEs will only embrace digital platforms if their customers feel safe. Practices around data handling, complaints, and identity verification should be shared and promoted across members. Third, transparency and predictability. MSMEs struggle when compliance becomes unclear and time-consuming. Here, digital tools such as AI-powered trade portals can help reduce costs and simplify procedures. On standards and data infrastructure, the 4th area, the WTO can help with convergence in business identifiers, electronic invoicing, and digital documentation. It can also support international cooperation on application programming interfaces and interoperable QR code standards. The Philippines continues to be an active proponent of MSME inclusion at the WTO, and as a participant in the informal working group on MSMEs, we work with over 100 members to advance concrete solutions. We hope that the speakers and your discussion with them today will surface not only insights and strategies, but also case studies and real-world examples of MSME digitalization. Please engage actively with our panel and let us ensure that MSMEs are not just included, but empowered in the future of global trade. Thank you, and a very good morning to all.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for your opening remarks, and we're very appreciative that you're joining us here today. So yes, before we kick this off, allow me to introduce my co-panelists. So I will be your moderator and also a panelist. We are trying to be efficient that way. So to my left, we are joined by the VP of Public Policy and Government Relations of Dana, Mr. Felix Sharif. Just as a broad introduction, Dana is one of the largest e-wallets in Indonesia, which, as some of you might know, is the largest consumer market by population in Southeast Asia. To my right, we are thankful that Ms. Carmela Haltgreave, Deputy Head and Head of Operations of the Bank of International Settlements Innovation Hub, joins us this morning from Basel. And as I said earlier, I am Rui Zamora, Chief Strategy Officer of GCash, the largest fintech super app in the Philippines. So maybe I will kick this off and pass it on to the two of you. Maybe we can start with a brief introduction of our organizations and some of the initiatives we are doing that are relevant to the digitalization of MSMEs. So in the Philippines, GCash is focused on the single vision of providing finance for all Filipinos, whomever and wherever they are in the world. And one segment we are focused on would be the MSMEs. To date, we have about 6 million inferred informal merchants in our user base. And through the help of innovations such as QR interoperability and other innovations, it has helped leapfrog digitalization for a lot of MSMEs, starting off obviously with payments acceptance, right? Digital payments acceptance. So with that, I'll hand it over maybe to Felix first.
Thank you very much, Rowena. Good morning, everyone. Hope you are in a very good, healthy way this morning. Thanks a lot, especially special thanks to the organizer of the WTO Public Forum, and also special thanks to the Filipino missions to WTO. Really honored to have me here. My name is Felix Sharif. I'm the VP of Public Policy and also Government Relations at Dana Indonesia. Dana Indonesia is one of the Indonesia's largest digital wallet platform, where we have more than 2,000 million user registered in our application, and we have more than 1 million MSMEs join to our applications. Our mission at Dana Indonesia is trying to make Indonesia a cashless society. And why is that? If you are following the discourse on the financial inclusion in Indonesia before in 2014, we are quite struck with a report that's saying that more than half of our Indonesia population remains unbanked. And through this opportunity, I would like to share some of the lessons learned on what we have, where currently more than 85% of our population is already bankable. And that's why it is shaped by a robust policy that coming from our government, and how public and private partnership through digital wallet platform like Dana can shape that kind of collaboration. Perhaps that's like the starter for me. Thank you.
Good morning from my side as well. It's a real pleasure to be here with you, so thank you very much for the invite. My name is Carmela Holtgreve, and I'm the Deputy Head to the BIS Innovation Hub. The BIS, the Bank for International Settlements, core mission is to support central banks in pursuing their core mandates on price and financial stability. The Innovation Hub is kind of the youngest part of the BIS. It was only set up 5 years ago, and you can describe it a bit as a joint venture between the BIS and 7 central banks around the globe. And from this kind of worldwide angle, we try to bring in regional expertise on the one hand and a global perspective on the other, when exploring the impact of technology either on financial stability or monetary policy, or how technology can be used to foster and increase the best possible and effective work of central banking. And through this work, we kind of generate knowledge that then can be taken on from the national authorities in their way on how they engage either with fintechs or in the national environments. So it's kind of a meta level on where we try to bring the benefits to the central banks, and then they bring that benefit further into their home markets. Thank you.
I think that's a very good way of seeing both sides, the policy making side from global and regional perspective, and you have Dana and GCash here represented for the more execution and I guess implementation side of things. So let's get down to it, really, the topic for today, and maybe we can start with the topic of challenges for MSMEs from maybe a policy perspective or an implementation perspective from GCash and Dana. What do we see as the largest structural challenges that MSMEs face in participating actively in digital trade? Felix, do you want to start?
Oh yeah, sure. Thanks a lot for the question. I think that's really interesting. With regard, perhaps I would like to start with the case for Indonesia first. And of course, MSMEs is always the backbone of our economy and the testaments of our economic resilience. The SMEs in Indonesia, they are account to more than like 61% of the GDP, contributing to 79% of the workforce itself. And with regard to that, we really hope, and also we're trying always find a way on how to make sure in a very inclusive way they are joined on board to the digital platforms. It's not like an option whether they would like to go offline or online, but how they can transform for their business. This is the importance of the matter of the cost of cash handling in Indonesia, and a little bit of a challenge if the participant, if you are working on the academic field in this regard, it would be good to have a reference on the cost of cash handling, particularly in the region of Southeast Asia. And of course, Mr. Ambassador, you are taking like a chairmanship next year in ASEAN. I think that would be a good case also for our region. And in that perspective, currently before in Indonesia, we have more than like 65% of 65 million of MSMEs, and only 40 million of them enjoy online platform, meaning that's only like 61% who already joined online. We would like to make sure everyone integrated to the online platform and give them like a very seamless onboarding. I joined couple conversation yesterday, but it's pretty much user-centric, talking about DPI and how to make sure like an API and open platform can really make user easily join the platform. But we never talk about the merchant itself, the MSSE as part of the DPI. Now it's time for us to think ahead on how we can make sure MSMEs can join on board to digital platform in a very easy way. It could be like several identification from the respective government that they built into the platform, so they can easily join on board to the online platform and really can thrive in the digital economy. I think that would be a challenge, and the next challenge is the adoption itself and trying to make sure that digitalization is really a key to that growth.
Yeah, so I think that's pretty common across the neighboring ASEAN countries, getting them to a multi-channel, offline and online, and also the ease of digitalization in their operations. From a Philippine perspective, I would offer a structural view and a user view in terms of what the biggest challenges are that we see. The structural one would really be around the lack of documentation requirements. Let us not forget that there is something very unique about the behavior of, or the profile of micro and small, specifically enterprises, in that they are actually behaving like consumers, right? Except once they onboard to anything digital, the requirements for their participation actually shifts. Permits, costs, etc. So I think that's the first one, structural in terms of the barrier. The other one is more individualistic in nature, which is really, how do I now distinguish my behavior as a consumer participating in the digital economy versus my behavior as a merchant, right? And we see that there's hardly any distinction really, especially if you are just starting out. So that begs the question, should the policies and the products and services also be very distinct for MSMEs?
So if you think about what is necessary to really realize the full potential of a digital financial infrastructure, of more of such solutions, you need to focus on interoperability and try to get a better grip on the various layers that are necessary to be addressed to really achieve an interoperable infrastructure that then can allow kind of and I mean, there wouldn't be a better place than here to discuss this, but a global economy really needs interconnected, interoperable payment system that can reduce frictions, lower costs, and promote financial inclusions. And we already heard about that. But to achieve that, interoperability is not only a technical issue, it has various layers that need to be looked at. And we strongly believe that this needs to be addressed and holistically viewed in terms of governance, legal frameworks, compliance, and business models. And there's not one solution that fits all markets or infrastructure, but there is a need of understanding and learning from each other. And one of our core beliefs and core missions we try to pursue in our experimental work is to bring these various learnings from around the globe together so that we can kind of build on the experiences and the learnings from one another. And I do think that when we look at the benefits then for each jurisdiction or regional group, you need to start small and then you can spend bigger and then vice versa learn from each other. And I do think this is very nicely reflected to what you already said as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Carmela. I think the point on regulatory compliance and the cost of being compliant. So I mentioned earlier about just the cost to participate, which is the multiple documents that are required, the different payment scheme once they are recognized as a merchant, whether they're micro, small, or medium. And then there is the cost of being compliant. I mean, in practical terms, it's not even just the cost of compliance. If you are a sole proprietor, and most often like a one-man or one-woman team, you don't necessarily have the time to go through all of the regulations and try to understand that and then comply with it, while really the top of mind for you is how do I increase my sales and how do I get access to a larger consumer market, right? So I think these are very practical but very real considerations that we all need to start thinking about, not just from a domestic lens, but really unlocking in the view of ASEAN a large regional consumer market, right? So we've talked about the biggest challenges we see from a policy perspective and from a local market perspective. And I think one of the staggering data points is really the financing gap that MSMEs have. And a recent report quoted that this financing gap is to the tune of $5.7 trillion, right? So if you look at that, I mean, obviously there is a similar challenge in terms of consumer fair lending access. But let's focus today on this financing gap for MSMEs. And I think we need to also think of what the most innovative solutions are to not just provide access to the MSMEs, but to make sure that this is fair credit access that will be manageable by these fledgling businesses. So Felix, I don't know if you have some efforts out of Dana or broadly in Indonesia for financing solutions or lending solutions addressed to MSMEs.
Thank you for the questions. Because my business model is focusing on the payment system, but I also at the same time is the vice chairman for Indonesia Association for e-commerce, and also actively participated in some of the Indonesia FinTech associations. If we talk about MSMEs, particularly in a country like Indonesia, you cannot really separate MSMEs with the user itself. Because most of the cases is that one user, they have one business entity and it cannot be separated. So we need to talk about the user itself, how the user, they are joined on board to a financial means of finance, like access to finance, and how we can create a credible credit portfolio of the user. So the first thing is trying to make sure they are financially inclusive. That's the first one. The second one on how to make sure they are joined on board of the business entity into like a formal financial institution. And then we can like help them to create like credit portfolio for their loans. That's like the foundation of how we can address the financial gap out of that. The second one is more on the structure part and also the behavior and also the knowledge in accessing the loan itself. If we talk about loans, the first thing that come up in their head is like, how do I get loan from the banks? They never really thought, hey, actually, I can get a loan from fintech company. which is much more agile and also less required, not to be harmful to the colleagues from the banks, but we are much more agile in terms of our creating credit portfolio and environment as well. And yes, indeed, the loan itself is less in terms of amount compared to the banks, but I would like to really encourage our MSMEs to tap another means of loans. And also a little bit suggestion to our policymakers also in terms of the fiscal structure on giving loans to the SMEs, the default also still banks on how to distribute loans from the bank to the people. But also at the same time, it's time for us, for fintech also to be included. I think that's also could be like a key in how to addressing the financial, the gap for loans, yeah.
Yeah, I think also recognizing the behavior of the consumers that are also the MSMEs is a great insight on the kind of innovations we can provide in terms of microfinancing. In the case of the Philippines, and particularly in GCash, one innovative solution that we are very proud to see has worked is providing microloans, not just to individuals, but also to MSMEs. We have a micro-lending company called Fuse, and we are very proud to share that to date, 1 in 3 of the borrowers are small business owners, and 1 of the 3 borrowers are actually women, right? And it has performed from a business perspective quite well in terms of NPLs and the reavailment rates of the loans, which is showing that it has been an effective model in terms of penetrating that market. And one of the reasons we see that it's been effective are 2 things. One is trying to address the structural challenge I mentioned earlier, which is being able to service individuals or MSMEs that otherwise the traditional banks would not be able to service because maybe their operations are still very small or they do not have enough collateral. And the second one is really the power, and I know this has been discussed in several sessions yesterday, the power of data, right? In fintech companies, data becomes the proxy, if you will, for credit history, for financial statements that typically are required for you to participate and get access to the loans. And it becomes even more powerful because the data that is based on your transaction behavior and the use, how you use the app, the e-wallet, is even more real time, right? So the credit profiling, what is the best loan and at what best rates to give you that would be palatable for you and would increase your ability to repay the loan at the right time, also increases significantly. So we have been very encouraged with the results, and I think that is one key innovation that has worked in the Philippines. Carmela, if you have a point of view on this as well?
Yes, maybe another angle to look at the importance of data. When you see kind of the evolving landscape and the fast technological pace this is all developing on, you also see a need to use this data to detect or find new fraud patterns or kind of mechanism that could be endangering the sound and safe financial system, either from a small enterprise perspective, but also from a regulator's perspective. So when you think about all this kind of new possibilities, you also need to think about the emerging risks that come with this. And from the work we do, we see an increased need to think holistically, kind of as a safeguarding financial system perspective, also developing a technology stack that allows you to recognize new patterns of fraud while preserving privacy. Yeah? So there is a kind of 2 angles to this which need to be taken into account when thinking about the benefits of the data generated here.
And the same, it's equally critical for consumers and businesses, regardless of the size alike, no? The topic of cybersecurity and safety. Which brings me to the next topic, which is what are examples in Indonesia, or what you're seeing out of the central banks you're working with, of public-private partnerships that have been effective in helping MSMEs not just gain access to digital payment options or microfinancing, but also kind of leapfrog their ability to enhance their cybersecurity and fraud detection capabilities. So allow me to start off maybe in the Philippines. Our government has partnered with the MSME sector specifically on some initiatives such as, and Carmela, you were talking about this earlier, how do we recognize that it is a legitimate or a trustworthy MSME? So something as simple as what we call the e-commerce Philippines trust mark, which is your way of validating that it is a legitimate MSME that you're transacting with. And obviously in fintech apps such as GCash, we have while it is smooth, it is also a robust onboarding mechanism, right? And it's all done digitally. We call it the EKYM, Know Your Merchant, which is the counterpart of the KYC for individual customers. And that in itself, it's very simple, but you're able to weed out, potentially fraudulent merchants. Of course, part of it is also investing in the cybersecurity and fraud detection tools, which Carmela was referring to earlier, which I think is really critical because it's in the patterns that you see, right? And you can tell real time or detect real time, but more importantly, address real time also what to do with these potentially fraudulent merchants and consumers. There are also a lot of efforts in terms of mentorship of MSMEs in the Philippines, because a lot of them have a great idea but are challenged with scaling. So some of the efforts that our government has done is to partner successful enterprises with startup MSMEs so that there is knowledge transfer and learning. Would you like to share some examples from Indonesia, Felix?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for bringing such an interesting topic on how we can, together preventing fraud. Fraud itself is always a global problem, but if you take a look that in another region of Asia Pacific, and if you list down some countries, you will see a very interesting pattern. Usually top 3 is always country with a very robust financial sectors, like for example Singapore and Hong Kong, and suddenly this year Indonesia is number 2. So in that sense there is something wrong, right? The way that we see fraud, the way that we see scam, the way that we see risk is often kept by the company. We don't want to share those kind of dirty things, right? But the thing is, fraudsters is always one step ahead. They are always use ChatGPT faster, more than us. They are much more smarter than us. And in that sense, we cannot keep those kind of risks to our own self. We need to share that risk. Why is that? It's just within a second, my money can be hacked and transferred to the banks. It happens especially to the most fragile groups of the society, including my mother. My mother is 70 years old, and if she receive attacks in WhatsApp pretending to be me, she would believe it, and it happened. She transferred the money. So we really need to protect. The thing is, the market for fraudsters is not fragmented. But for the victim of that, it's quite various. What I'm trying to say is that someone will text you. They will be on social media. They will hack my account. They will be on fintech. It will transfer the money. That goes to the bank. So many players on that. You need a single orchestration. Make sure the money can be whole before transfer to other. And it could be safe in terms of customer protection. And in that sense, I'm really happy that last year the Indonesian government, through the Financial Services Authority, or JK, launched a body, what's so-called anti-scam center, where they force, it need to be forced actually, because it's a national emergency for us, fintech company, banks, e-commerce, social media, to be there. They sit together in a room, each of the representative, to prevent the loss of the money. So I think that kind of thing also should be replicated to others, and we take that lesson learned from our colleague from Singapore. We are inspired by the Singaporean on how they do that, and we implement it back home. So that's one of our way for public-private partnership, on that.
Yeah, and I think we can all agree that the PPP model is really a key unlock to opening up the regional market for MSMEs, whichever ASEAN country they're coming from. And so, like we've discussed, some of the more domestic-focused policies and challenges and examples. So now maybe we can shift towards how do we open up the ASEAN market for MSMEs across the different ASEAN countries, no? And Carmela, I don't know if you want to start by sharing with us the exciting progress that Project Nexus, and she can introduce that in a bit, is helping with, and how that helps unlock opportunities for ASEAN MSMEs.
Yes, I'm happy to bring in some of our examples, and let me build on what you just said before on the importance of public-private partnerships, and I would even expand this public-private to and tech academia. Yeah? So to really kind of be able to move with the fast pace of technology, we need to join forces in exploring those for the benefits, but also for the risk side. And one aspect is to better understand each other in terms of, do we really mean the same things when using the same language when we come together, either as public sector and regulators and on the other hand the private sector, but also a different form of academic interaction. Kind of central banks are super used to work with economists and research institutes around the world, but are we really used to work with, I don't know, AI? Experts from around the globe and universities? Are we used to dig into quantum-safe cryptography with the respected academics that need to be on the table as well? So I would like us to broaden the perspective from private partnership to also include a kind of a tech-knowledged academia into these joint approaches and better understandings. One of our 7 centers around the globe is based in Singapore, and it's a joint venture between the BIS and the MAS. And sometimes innovation is not only about creating something very new or exploring completely new paths, but sometimes new technology can allow us to improve what is functioning. And then coming back to the aspect of interoperability, we launched a project some time ago with several central banks, and the Philippines are one of them, but India is another, Thailand, Malaysia, in which we jointly explored how can we better link seamlessly instant payment systems in this region. And this proof of concept seemed kind of, was super successful, and it was picked up. So it's not about us as an international organization or the Innovation Hub to bring the final solution, but it's about empowering the central banks to decide if they want to pick it up. And this project is called Nexus, and in spring this year we handed over Nexus to an NGO built it and set up by 5 central banks to really pursue and to create a multilateral solution for connecting national instant payment systems. Why? Kind of having the ambition to become a global network, the benefits of kind of agile software development were embedded in terms of starting small and then be able to scale. Yeah? And I think 6 learnings that can be taken from the project. And if you want to know how this develops further, I encourage you to reach out to the NGO that was set up. But aspects that I think are learnings that are broadly applicable for the region, but also beyond, is public policy goals. First of all, need to be very clear. What are your concrete goals of safe, efficient, speed and cost, but also accessible and transparent cross-border? Yeah? So you need to be very clear about your goal you want to achieve there. Then, inclusivity. How do we represent all participants or stakeholder interests in a way that suits them, that also kind of empowers their respected ecosystems be well represented in this endeavor? Then the third aspect, and I do think that is very important, is neutrality. You need to represent fairness and impartially, kind of independently from the separate jurisdictions. These aspects cannot be kind of fostered enough to really set up trust and build on this and allow this trust to grow. And then fourth aspect would be financial sustainability. It needs to be something that is not, it needs to be as cheap as possible and as safe as possible. It also is crucial to embed agility in the development. You know, you need to react. If you develop something that fits your needs of today, that may not fit the needs of tomorrow. So you need to be able to be adaptive and to change course while kind of following your first goal. And the sixth aspect, and this is very much of what you already said, is the ability to scale. Yeah? One thing is, and this is, 10% of the work is think about a good working prototype, yeah, or something, but if you really want to bring it into production and scale, 90% of the work waits there and comes with a lot of hurdles. So you need to think of these aspects early enough when setting up such an either regional or beyond regional endeavor to then kind of allow this to grow.
Thank you, Carmela. I think those are all very relevant themes, and allow me to just kind of summarize and repeat it, because those are all very relevant, and it will lead us to the next topic or the next point that we will discuss a little further. So cross-border principles that we should be looking at, both from the private and public sector: transparency, inclusivity, neutrality, financial sustainability, agility, and most importantly, I guess, for financial sustainability is also the ability to scale. And with that, the next question that I wanted to ask the panel would be, what are the emerging examples out of ASEAN, or even if you see other regional blocs, Carmela, introducing policies or practices that would democratize or make it easy for micro and small medium enterprises to really expand their operations and their market, not just from domestic view, but also to include, in our case, the rest of the ASEAN countries. No? So maybe I'll start, Felix, and then I'll pass this on to you. So from an ASEAN perspective, there is really a coordinating committee focused on enabling cross-border and digital trade among ASEAN MSMEs. And some specific examples that I found very practical is really, as an example, number one, having an ASEAN single window so that the paperwork and the documentation, the customs requirements for anything cross-border would be cohesive. I know everyone is working towards a single standard, but everyone is starting with at least making that more available in terms of information and working towards standardization of that. There is also a working committee on financial inclusion, which expands access to lending options, fair lending options for the MSMEs, to go beyond, as you said earlier, Felix, the traditional banks, to go and find options in fintech firms, e-wallets, and even peer-to-peer lending, right? As regulated by the respective central banks. And then also the topic on interoperable QRs expanding beyond just domestic coverage, but what would it be like for, let's say, an Indonesian tourist who is enjoying a holiday in one of the Philippine beaches to be able to pay for something they buy using their Indonesia e-wallet? So there are efforts also in terms of interoperability of QR payments in the region. You want to add anything?
Sure, that's a really interesting topic, and I think the first thing that I would like to highlight in here, the need of standardization first in their respective countries. Standardization should include, the first one is API. If I can give you like a history of our development, for our application, a fintech application, digital wallet, if our user would like to send money to a certain banks, the way that our process development between our fintech and the bank, it could take like a year to connect because of different protocol, different authentication, and different kind of any technical details. And then we're really thankful to the work done by our central bank. They are push us to have like a single API, what's called as now. Because of the standardization, it only take us less than 3 months to connect with other financial institution in Indonesia. It make less than 3 months to work on that. That's on the API. The second one is on the QR standard. If I can give you a little bit of the nuance on the QR, of course, in a country like Switzerland, the adoption of like chip-based card is already high. It's different in Indonesia. The adoption of chip-based is only like 10% of the bank account holder. So it's different kind of market. So we need to have a means for payment for very inclusive way, which is QR. Each of the merchant can produce the QR itself. I can buy meatball in the street vendor, only costing me like 10,000. And I can go to Four Seasons for 1 million, also paying with the same QR. That's inclusive. That's the importance of standardization. And the third point is about the fast payment. We just established our fast payment, what's called as BI Fast, and it's really reduced the cost because we have the same protocols. That's the importance of standardization in respective countries. In another countries, standardization also should be there. And I'm happy to share with you, actually, Rowena, I can buy meatball or any like hawker vendors in Bangkok, Singapore, Kuala Lumpur. We are already live recently with Japan, and now we are in the process of sandboxing with China. Because the respective country, they already have like standardization, and it's easy for us to connect with them. So I think if we talk about like standardization and interoperability, that's one of the cases. Yeah.
And imagine how much we can unlock with these kinds of examples. So GCash as well has enabled cross-border payments, and one of our representatives from the WTO Philippine mission earlier was proudly showing me his GCash Visa card, which has allowed him to transact cross-border quite easily. And this is the kind of services that we provide, including the MSMEs that do, let's say, sourcing, as you said, no, from countries like China and all of that. So the cost to participate cross-border also becomes significantly lower. Yeah. I am told we need to provide time for some Q&A from the audience, but I thought we could wrap up the panel with what I call a rapid fire response from our panelists, including myself, on what we think the single most critical investment that governments or the private sector need to make to truly provide access to ASEAN MSMEs to the digital economy. Carmela, do you want to maybe?
Yes. First of all, I think it is very important to see that kind of even supranational or multinational or national implications from the regulators have kind of this this direct angle to the economies, to the society. So when you think about central banking and the various mandates central banks have around the globe, they are not similar, they vary quite a bit, but still the need to pursue financial and monetary stability, something that unites central banks and also that encourage a strong need for collaboration and learning from another. And the aspect of public-private partnership and bringing in academia is also necessary to kind of get a profound understanding when it comes to technologies. And this is not a nice to have, this is kind of core skin in the game to be able to fulfill the mandate in a sustainable way. So when we think about collaboration and we want to embrace it even more to kind of learn from each other in a better, safer and faster way, we need to always think and include what would be the governance framework for this collaboration? How can we build on this? What are the communication patterns that we need to have and established? How do we keep up transparency and trust? How do we build up knowledge that is sustainable and can be shared, and then others can build on this? And I do think this is something that I would kind of like to conclude with, because it's a call for action for all of us to keep that in mind when thinking about collaboration. Because when change happens, we better be prepared. It happens for the better, right?
I think continuing to what Carmela is saying, of course, it's most definitely it's about collaboration between the public and also between the public and private sectors in here, and how it can be shaped and it can be cemented down, and how the basis of the foundation itself is innovation and technology. And also coming from the public sector is how to create like enabling policy in here, so we can have like a transformation in terms of digitalization and trying to make sure every financial means are accessible for all of the society. I think that's like the takeaway from my side.
So, governance around collaboration and access. So, I mean, in a rapid fire setup, that would be our key takeaways. From my end, from a Philippine perspective, I would say 2 S's. The first one is to simplify. That would be I guess, a very specific ask. How do we simplify the cost to participate for MSMEs, especially as we ask them to transition to cash light or cashless? And the second one is to help us to scale the impact. The private sector is well placed to launch agile services, innovative solutions, but we need help from our counterparts in the policy sector, in the public sector, to also help us in terms of where do we find them, how do we scale, so that there is significant take-up, right? And that there are more MSMEs that could be assisted. Okay, so I have my cue that we need to start our audience Q&A. So I encourage anyone from the audience, I think we have 10 to 15 minutes for any questions you might have for the panel. Yes, please. If you can just briefly introduce yourself, where you're from, and your question.
Thank you so much. My name is Kefas Chepkoti. I'm the head of the Policy Training Center in Africa, or TRAPCA in short. We provide capacity building for the rest of the continent in terms of international trade. Hearing about the various options that could actually make access to financing for SMEs inclusive, probably something that didn't come out is the aspect of trade finance and trade finance solutions, which actually are designed to handle the problem that banks usually present, collateral. I didn't hear that come out as one of the solutions. Maybe you could elaborate. Thank you.
Trade finance solutions. Maybe I can take that first, and if my co-panelists have points of view, feel free to jump in. So from an ASEAN perspective, I think we didn't call it trade finance, but the topic on access to loans that are specific to MSMEs can broadly fall fall under that, right? How to make it more accessible so that they have the funding they need to expand or scale their operations. But specific also to ASEAN, and I need my notes to refer to this, there were some efforts to enable swap lines, right? So that, and I think in the long term, Project Nexus is also kind of looking towards this. How do we do real-time and local currency settlements for MSMEs that are located in different parts of the region so that they are no longer burdened with the cost of remittance and foreign exchange, FX, right? So those are very simple, very practical, but also very kind of ongoing efforts. You have a...
Perhaps continuing to what you said about the local currency settlements, and actually in the case in the region where we already, like for example, between Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, recently with Japan and with China, we are settled the transaction within our respective currency by passing the US dollars. That's for the retail payment. I think that's one of the example that we already have. And also for fast payment, actually, we looking forward for the implementation. Either it will be driven by private sector, or it could be driven by the public sector to various means, also from the Project Nexus. We really need that because the cost in sending money abroad for remittance is really, really expensive. We need to democratize that admin fee.
Any other questions from the audience?
Hello, my name is Hauser from Frankfurt, Germany. I'm a freelance economist, and I'm having a question about the Asian umbrella. Is there some kind of institutional coverage for the projects you mentioned from ASEAN side, or is it just a little lower on a level between countries or between organizations, or something more institutional? I make the comparison with the EU. We are having a lot of projects running under the umbrella of the EU. We are having countries who want to opt out to velocities. There's a lot of discussion about this institutional things. Maybe you could give me a hint in this institutional question. Thank you.
Maybe I can start with that. So our version of that is the ASEAN Working Committee or Coordinating Committee on MSMEs. So that is taken from an institutional perspective. ASEAN, a policy body that looks at region-specific issues and ways to democratize access to each other's markets, among other things. So there is that institutional and regional approach to it as well. I think some examples that were shared earlier were really central banks, and maybe Carmela can share a little more to kind of summarize the institutional perspective. Central banks coming together on how we can equip interoperable payment solutions across the region.
So what we try to do is bring together central banks, have them jointly explore the art of the possible, or a potential challenge or potential risk, or whatever the matter might be, and then the learnings are kind of shared within the national environments of the respective central banks, and then it's up to them and their own either regional or national context to take on the learnings and decide on what they want to do with the learnings. So it's kind of from a neutral convener perspective is we really want and we see the necessity and the benefit of bringing central banks together, supervisory authorities, and sometimes all the other participants, as explained before, to increase the learning and the understanding of technology. And then this is kind of one step, and then the next step is what do we do with the learning that is then up to others.
Hi, my name is José Menez. I work for KPMG, but I'm here as a small foreign business in the Philippines. My question is there any like digital education for SMEs, or really SMEs like in the farm, to use fintech for their business, for those who doesn't use any cashless fintech app at the moment?
Yes, we do have a couple education and socialization programs, particularly targeted the vulnerable groups. To upscale MSMEs, we have an annual program, I would say, Sis Berdaya. Sis taken from Sister Berdaya in Indonesian, which means empower, meaning to empower the women, where we collect thousands of Indonesian women-owned MSMEs throughout the archipelago, where they have like, the first one is capacity building on how to scale up their business, and the second one is of course on how to get the finance to their business. And for the past 2 years, we also include the group from our brother and sister that have like disability to also join on board on that. And it's a very successful program that we have based on our metrics of calculations. Once they on board on that program, they see an increase of more than 40% of their annual revenues on that. On the second one is to the most prone of the group in our society in terms of fraudsters and scammers. We do have both offline and online activation to educate them, as simple as please do not click this kind of link. Please do not share your OTP. And also for the audience, please change your password. Please do not make your birthday as your password. Please change it now. I know it, most of us use that. Please change that. So that kind of things, the most simple things that we really need to address to the most vulnerable groups. Yeah.
So in the Philippines, and it's nice to see you here, maybe later we can also have an offline chat so we can learn more about your efforts with the agriculture sector. Second largest sector in the Philippines, by the way, in terms of contribution to GDP. So it's very significant for us. Well, from a GCash perspective, of course, we need to, for us to reach them, ideally they are already using the app, because you said earlier what potential efforts if they are not on the app yet. We are in the midst of rolling out very community-based financial training, and we have actually been prioritizing the agricultural sector precisely for this reason, sir. And we believe that a lot of them are already using the app. So the next question is, what kind of accessible solutions would best help them? And it's a very timely question because we're excited to be launching very soon on our platform. We have what we call the mini program. Think of it as an app-in-app, like a e-commerce within the wallet, so that the users don't have to toggle between different apps. And what we did was to provide a digital storefront for one of the aggregators, helping bring fresh produce from the provinces to buyers in the cities. So that effectively addresses two key issues. Number one, the cost of middlemen, which, as we all know, could be very prohibitive and very unfair to the farming groups. And second is providing the market, the consumer market. They no longer have to travel to the city areas, NCR, and put up their own stall to sell their produce. Just with a few taps on your mobile phone, you will have buyers for the produce, right? And the aggregator that we're working with helps in terms of the logistics in making sure that we're able to identify which farmers need that access to a consumer market. So those are just some examples. But I think this space, not just for the Philippines, but other countries in ASEAN, is really primed for growth. Agri-tech and how we can provide that in the finance apps. Yes, please.
Hello, my name's Lucy Connor. I own a number of online specialised platforms like shiprights.com, and actually I think it might hook on quite nicely to what you were just speaking about, because I'm all in e-commerce. But have you got any sort of strategies throughout the ASEAN sort of region in terms of sort of market using digitalization and e-commerce for sort of alternative sort of routes into markets globally. I mean, when I'm going around sort of the embassies in London and speaking with them, traditionally we're talking about going into supermarkets, but actually I think there's a fantastic opportunity, and essentially that's what I do, in terms of utilising e-commerce and digital to penetrate new markets. I mean, shiprights.com, for example, that's specifically designed to penetrate into the blue economy, yachting, super yachting. So we're taking sort of the unknown products globally across Africa, Caribbean, Asian markets, and those unknown, unique products from MSMEs and you know, selling them to sort of the luxury high end. So yeah, so any sort of strategies or
Thank you for the question, Lucy. Although the question is a little bit quite far from my focus on the payment system, but I'm happy to share like a little bit from the perspective of the industry association itself, and because my position is the vice chairman for the Indonesia e-commerce associations, and indeed currently it's quite a challenge because mostly on the policy side for us to tap broader market in terms of outside the countries. The regulatory itself is not yet enabling us to do so. And in that sense, we need to comply to the local regulators before and to fulfill the domestic needs first. That's on the policy stand in Indonesia, and perhaps if there is like a new shift of the regulatory itself, of course we are more than happy to carry other market outside the country. Yeah.
Thank you, Lucy. I think Asia in general, not just ASEAN, is probably the hotbed for success of MSMEs in the online space or e-commerce. I can easily name, you know, very recognizable household brands that were born out of Asian ideas that have been successful e-commerce channels to help MSMEs. To your question on what are kind of the examples or best practices to get the MSMEs online, I think it goes back to kind of the first point I made earlier around how do you make it more accessible from a channel and a price perspective. Fortunately for us in Southeast Asia, it's a hugely digital native and kind of mobile first, digital first economy. Of the 680 million population, about 400 million of those are digital customers, which means that is your target market for anything e-commerce, right? So it's been a pretty exciting and busy space actually in the region. So access in terms of what does it take to get these brick and mortar MSMEs online, right? The cost to get them from brick and mortar to now having a digital storefront. And some examples of that really would be what is the cost, right, to them, the MDR as we call it, for them to participate. In ASEAN, there is a study on the total market size in terms of gross transaction value that flows through because of e-commerce, and clearly e-commerce is the largest contributor to that GTV, right? So the question now becomes, how do we identify and maybe provide incentive, right, for these MSMEs to go online through the e-commerce platforms, because it really does unlock a huge market for them, right? And also in the long run would have cost efficiencies for them as well.
Good morning, Martin Levy. I work at the International Trade Center. And I'd like to ask you what the role of business support organizations like Chambers of Commerce, industry associations, national trade promotion organizations can be to help these SMEs go and trade online? So you have your own initiatives, but what kind of role can the BSOs have? And what challenges do they face? What are the problems they have that prevent them from scaling these kind of activities? Thank you.
First of all, my colleague and I attended the ITC session yesterday. It was very good. We learned a lot. The one with Brazil and Jamaica panelists. So for business support organizations or like chambers of commerce, number one, it's actually providing the capability build, right? It requires a certain tech savviness to encourage the brick and mortar mom and pop shops to actually go online. Fortunately for us in the Philippines, and I think the same is true for other ASEAN countries, the consumers are very digital savvy. Philippines is one of the highest users of certain social media apps and online social media platforms globally. So that in itself makes it a bit natural or easy for micro entrepreneurs to onboard. I think the biggest support from BSOs is really the challenge of scaling, right? How do I take my operations from a one-person operation to something that potentially I can export, right? And so it's really providing the technical capability, in my point of view, that the BSOs can provide support to MSMEs. Oh, sorry. Yes, Camille, do you have it?
Thank you very much. It was the first time that I met the importance of ASEAN when I was watching a documentary called ASEAN The Next Generation, broadcasted on Bloomberg. And I realized that, first digital e-commerce is fine. But now the patterns of international trade is changing significantly. And now many countries are capable of e-commerce, exporting, and discovering new ways. Under the Trump administration, many countries are trying to find out new ways to cooperate and to ensure that the flow of funds to the country, including the macroeconomic indicators, the employment and others. So can I ask you, under these circumstances, what is next for ASEAN as a policy?
So I cannot answer for ASEAN, but maybe broadly, as the world grows more digital, and if there's a broader need for interconnectivity and interconnectedness. So something that needs to be looked at from various angles, how to ensure that this can happen in a safe, sound, we heard before about the challenges of remittances, the high cost that comes with it. How do we lower this cost? How do we make this a safe and sound, approachable, interoperable, cross-border solutions that allow then to enter markets from various perspectives? And this is something central banks deeply care about. That would be kind of the broader policy perspective on it. I don't know if you want to add some Asian Pacific.
Yeah, perhaps if I can add a little bit of a point to that question, what would be like the next big thing for the policymakers to think about on how to really make ASEAN much more cohesive and also making the transaction between the region is much more growing. Of course, the first thing we need to work on the standardization for each countries in terms of the payments, because some countries, the way they model the market is still quite fragmented in terms of the payment system. So standardization should be there first in order other countries need to connect. So there will be like the first thing, and it should be equipped with another policy framework. It could be like local currency settlements and also how to work together. I think that's like additional points coming from my side. Yeah.
Well, on behalf of the Philippine mission, it has been a great hour and 15 minutes. And maybe concluding, we have the ASEAN ambassadors here from Brunei and Philippines. And that was how we opened. Maybe that last question is indeed ASEAN 2026 is pathways to MSME digitalization. So, and AI, enabling AI. So we're very excited in ASEAN to unite and collaborate with the rest of the world. Maraming salamat. Thank you. A very good morning to all.